Okay, we are in Senate institutions. Today is Friday, April 4th, 2026. And we have one item on our agenda, which is additional testimony, because we've talked about it previously, for H550, which is an act relating to gender equity within Vermont's correctional facilities. And today we have Charlie Glisserman, Director of Policy with the Vermont Network. So thank you very much for being here.
Yeah.
And so we have had a run through.
Mhm.
It was a little while ago.
Okay.
It was definitely more than a week ago.
Mhm.
So you might want to just give us some basic information and then go to specifics.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me. Charlie Glisserman, Director of Policy at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
And do you know all of us? Senator Benson is new this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. It's great to see you again. So H550 addresses gender equity broadly in correctional facilities. There are two sections that I'm going to speak to specifically today that codify the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act standards in state law. So what I will do, if it's helpful to the committee, is provide a little bit of background on the Vermont Network's work on PREA in Vermont, why PREA was created, and then why we are in support of codifying PREA standards in state law in this moment. So as you all know, individuals who are incarcerated experience a heightened risk of sexual abuse and misconduct. Vermont is not immune from these realities. And protecting individual safety in state custody is a core responsibility of government. The Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act, PREA, was created to further that principle. That when the state incarcerates someone, it assumes control over that person's environment and a heightened duty to protect them from harm. And that duty extends equally to Department of Corrections staff who work in those facilities every day. And I have heard conversation from this committee that really reflects that principle, and really appreciate you all and your consideration of that. So for a little bit of background on PREA in Vermont, so in 2003, PREA was created. Its stated purpose was to provide analysis of the incidents and effects of prison rape in federal, state, and local institutions, and provide information, resources, recommendations, and funding to protect individuals from sexual harm. PREA was passed.
Do you mind if we ask?
I don't mind.
Just one question I want to know is, so this is a federal law.
Mhm.
So does the federal law only pertain to federal prisons, or does it also apply to state prisons?
It's a great question. So it is a federal law, but it applies to federal, state, and local correctional facilities. And so PREA was passed at the federal level. And then in 2013, Vermont DOC began implementing federal PREA standards in Vermont. So states were required to work with their federally recognized sexual violence coalition in that process. That's the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. So we worked closely at that time with the Department of Corrections to develop policies and procedures to facilitate PREA. And in 2015, Vermont DOC achieved that federal PREA certification. So today, this partnership continues through the Vermont Network's DIVAS program. I was in here a bit earlier this session with my colleague Kylan to speak about the confidential support services that we provide to people who are incarcerated in Vermont's correctional facilities, specifically at Chittenden Regional Correctional Facilities, including those who experience sexual harm while incarcerated.
Can I ask a question? So just going back to what you said about the network.
Mhm.
So the network is a specific type of what in the federal construct?
So it's the term is a federally recognized domestic and sexual violence coalition.
A federally recognized.
So there is an organization like the Vermont Network in every state and territory in Vermont, and different federal laws like the Violence Against Women Act direct those coalitions to take on different responsibilities to protect and serve survivors of violence at the state level.
Be WISE.
So WISE is one of our member programs. So we have 14 member programs across the state, and those are the incredible nonprofits at the community level that are providing direct services to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. They are roughly county-based, and so WISE is one of them that does really incredible work.
So then the federal government has authorized the network to
Mhm.
be this agency. Is there a reauthorization? Or is it, how did that, and I don't need a lot of detail, but just a tiny bit more.
Perfect. So, the Violence Against Women Act and the Family Violence Services Prevention Support Act, stuff.
Okay.
So these are the kind of corresponding domestic violence and sexual violence pieces of legislation. Those are reauthorized at the federal level from time to time. And then also both of these pieces of federal legislation included federal funding that was attached to it. And so we have ongoing relationships with federal grant administrators, and our work is, guided by those streams as well.
Okay, so say something happened and you didn't have your organization anymore.
Mhm.
Would the state need to find somebody or?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are at different points, different states have experienced this. We're very grateful that the Vermont
I'm glad
is
you
stable
did.
and here to stay. And we remain really eager to continue serving survivors, including through projects like our work with DOC around the PREA standards.
Yes. All right, no, you do great work, and it's really helpful to have that background. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I know that the services that we that survivors access both through programs that are at the Vermont network, like our Pro Bono Legal Clinic, or at our member programs, are vast. And I'm more than happy to share more information about them. Come back at another time if y'all are interested.
Thanks.
So why codify PREA standards in state law at this time? So Vermont has invested years into strengthening prevention and response to sexual violence in correctional facilities, and codifying PREA at the state level maintains and continues that progress. In December of 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice issued a memo announcing its intent to revise federal PREA standards to align with an executive order on gender ideology extremism. That rulemaking process is ongoing. In the interim, PREA auditors were instructed to ignore standards that protect transgender and intersex people while in correctional facilities who face disproportionately high rates of sexual violence in custody. Last year, the DOJ also made significant funding cuts to the National PREA Resource Center, which is the primary resource to support states in training and technical assistance and corrective action in response to PREA violations. The funding changes at the Resource Center interrupted a variety of activities, including training for DOJ certified PREA auditors, when there was already a significant shortage of auditors, which just further compromised their compliance work. Within a very short period of time, there have been very significant shifts to PREA at the federal level that will compromise incarcerated people's safety. So we see a need, alongside many other states who are pursuing similar work, to codify PREA at the state level as a necessary step to preserve the continuity, stability, and accountability that PREA has offered Vermont correctional facilities over the last decade plus, regardless of who holds office or whether federal agencies shift their priorities. Through this codification, Vermont will express its commitment to the protection and safety of all individuals who are incarcerated and those who work in correctional facilities. We really recognize there's so much more work to do beyond just what is included in this bill. And there may be future legislation on PREA compliance and enforcement that we may want to discuss with the committee in future years. But we do feel like these sections continue to preserve our progress and prevent us from falling back. So very high level, what those two sections do, which is section 6 and section 11 in the bill, is codify what Vermont correctional facilities are already required by federal law to do now. So it says, even if federal law changes, you are still held to these standards. And the standards are like spelled out within the bill. These are things like a zero tolerance for sexual abuse, limits of different viewing gender searches, training and education requirements, administrative remedies, all sorts of things that you could think of that span correctional activities and have opportunities to prevent sexual harm from occurring in a correctional facility. So this does not require any new standards, but just preserves what is currently in place. The Commissioner of Corrections does provide different kinds of supports on as required by FREA currently. This then requires those reports to also be submitted to this committee and your House Committee on Corrections and Institutions upstairs. So that is what Section 6 does. And that's kind of the meat of these this codification. But before I move on to Section 11, I just wanted to stop and see if you all had any questions about that section.
It's straightforward.
Okay, perfect. And then Section 11 is a report. So it says that on December 15th, 2027, DOC shall submit a report to those two committees. And it shall identify any changes to standards or reporting requirements under PREA as it may be amended. So that's an opportunity for, in a couple of years, the Vermont Department of Corrections to check in with lawmakers and say, okay, so we've seen, as I noted, these significant shifts in this short period of time. Now that we have more time, what is the state of PREA? What changes have been made? And an opportunity for lawmakers to revisit that issue as it's needed.
What, just a question?
Mhm.
So why wouldn't you do it at a longer date? Because doesn't seem that long.
So I think that as I noted,
Yeah,
I see that there will likely be future work beyond just December 2027 around PREA. But these, as I noted, have been pretty sweeping changes in a short period of time. And so I do think that a look back at that time period is probably appropriate.
okay, thank you.
That is all I have to share with you all today. I really appreciate your time. And I would be happy to answer any further questions.
Does anyone have any?
I don't think it's strictly.
Are there any other witnesses you would suggest? Because we've heard from DOC.
I recall that on the House side, primarily the folks speaking to these sections were the Vermont Network and the Department of Corrections.
Okay, all right.
In your opinion, does this language put anybody in front of anybody, or is it treating everybody equally?
I think that it is, so it's not doing anything new, right? It's just codifying the current standards. And I feel like it is very appropriately protective and data
So if somebody
driven.
misgenders somebody, what happens to the other person if they get do it unintentionally and it was just whatever it was? The new person comes in and misgenders somebody. How far of a problem does that create?
So speaking to those two sections, Section 6 and Section 11, which are only on the Prison Rape Elimination Act codification, that's only specific to sexual assault and sexual harassment within correctional facilities. And so, you know, something like what you just described wouldn't really be relevant to that.
Okay, well, I kind of read it that it is kind of because it's, you know, and then we have everyday life and we've seen where somebody's been misgendered by accident, not on purpose. And this is bill to make sure that there's equal protections for the person who made a mistake as it was to, the person who wants to feel like they were violated.
I think that that kind of situation that you're describing might be relevant to some of the different sections within the bill that are broader around gender equity in correctional facilities, not specific to the Prison Rape Elimination Act sections that I'm speaking to. we certainly see a need for safety of all incarcerated people, including transgender and intersex inmates, which do experience a heightened risk of sexual violence in correctional facilities. But I think the Department of Corrections might be a better entity to speak to, your question and how they would respond in that situation.
Because it is sexual violence in this definition of what I'm reading, is hard for somebody to make a mistake and say something. It's, it's the language basically says that you're creating violence against somebody for making a mistake. And I just want to make sure that should that happen, and it's not a repeated attempt to belittle somebody, that there's a mechanism to where mistakes are allowed. That's just the way it is. And I want to make sure that you're not bringing the language that just ruins somebody's career by a simple mistake.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm happy to follow up with some of the specific language, but the kinds of sexual violence that are relevant to the sections I spoke to are an involuntary or coarse, physical sexual act that is that a person is not able to consent to in a correctional facility. And so, I do think that the situations that we're speaking to are slightly different. I mean, they are actually very different.
Yeah. That's what so misgendering is more of there's not, there's, it's not a physical thing, right?
The language in here is very, very, very explicit.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
Do you have
And,
yeah.
No, but you read through it everywhere that you read. It's everywhere that you read, it's all about make sure you don't misgender or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens if you do? And I know how the world works, and I really, really do. And to me, there's a lot of language in here that actually it's not safe language for anybody who'd ever want to work in a correctional facility. And when we're having the problems of what we're having for retention, this is a layer of dangerousness that it would keep me from considering a career in corrections. I get that nobody can be discriminated against. I fully like that. This language in here just really puts somebody on a pedestal higher than the next person, as far as I'm concerned. I'd have a real hard time supporting this bill.
Okay, and so we'll get corrections in. And do you want a representative from the staff, the union, to come in?
No, I don't want to be a union person in here, but it's
Well, I would just I thought you might say that, but I just wanted to, because that is the typical way that we
just
hear from.
a dangerous bill. It's a dangerous bill for anybody to be working in corrections. A dangerous bill.
Okay, so we'll get more testimony on that. See what, okay.
And it's not to put words in the senator's mouth, but I think your concerns are more on other sections than necessarily the two that you're speaking to today. But question for you on those is, we're codifying essentially what the federal regulations say today. You've indicated the federal regulations are going to change. These rules or standards in here probably are going to be a step higher than, I'm just guessing, than where they may be revised to in the short term. But I want to make sure as the rules go forward down the road, and maybe that's done through this review, is they could also get stronger down the road. And we don't want to put ourselves into a position where we fall out of standard and non-compliance. So that's just a concern I have on how when we codify something, it says there it is. But the enabling piece is changing and will continue to change. And thus, I think we need to be cognizant of that, how this is structured so that it can react to change over time.
Right. Right, and how the state, would it be an automatic thing in some cases, or would we have to take action in other cases? So that's for our attorneys. We'll
Right,
have-
because we could end up where this is not in compliance, and I don't know how that affects
Yeah,
other things as it relates to, and I don't know what we get for federal funds, if any, for support of our corrections facilities, which is just a concern that as my whole thing about repeating things in two different places
right,
and then
right.
ending up in conflict, but I also understand what Senator Engel's concern is, and again, as you know, this is new to this committee for just a little bit of time, but I have seen where recruitment and retention of correction officers is a big problem. And the last thing in the world we want to do is put into place things that could either curtail or harm those individuals, because we can't keep enough of them as it is.
I don't want to ruin somebody's career
Yeah.
by, which it would. And, or add stress to them, to their career. And this thing is fraught with all of that. It's just every page of it is fraught with somebody making an honest mistake, just trying to do their job. And then their career is done,
Right.
for a slip of the tongue.
We want
And
people to
on-
be treated correctly, but we don't want people to be penalized too dramatically or shunned because they made a mistake or they, who knows?
Right,
And so
right.
we just gotta be careful with the language.
Sure, and I appreciate that. And two things I would say is that situation, if we have supervisors who are not understanding the context, that's not a good thing, right? And that's not a good supervisor. And safety for the inmates is better for the staff. So safety is safety, and that's good for everybody. So
I want the staff to be safe.
exactly,
I
that's
want
what
the
I'm
staff to
saying.
be, I want the staff to be safe.
Yeah.
There's nothing in here for staff safety at all.
Well, I think that management can always make things
We
unhappy.
don't disagree on
But-
that.
All right, well, we'll talk. We'll get more.
We could get
testimony.
Village Council and talk.
Yeah,
about that.
I'm putting that down. Yep.
I think Charlie was gonna say something.
Thank you. So Senator Benson, really great question around like, how does this interact with federal law? I mean, what I see here is that this was codifying a floor for protections at the state level. It does not necessarily mean that if federal protections are stronger, that DOC would be held to a different standard. You know what I have seen for much of this bill is that it really just is codifying current practice. I would also know that the Prison Rape Elimination Act standards apply to people who are working and volunteering in correctional facilities as well, and protects them from sexual violence within a correctional facility by those same standards. That there is training and other administrative responses that are meant to protect those employees.
Thank you. Okay. So, any other questions? We'll hear about it again. And so you might want to keep track of what we're doing.
I sure
Or we
will.
can.
Don't worry.
Yeah, that's true. I don't need to tell you that. Okay, do we have anything else?
Yeah, no, as I say, I don't think the questions are about the two sections that, yeah.
Right, well, what I have on my notes, the misgendering, talk to DOC, we'll get DOC in here to answer questions and understand exactly the impact on staff. And then the reaction of the state to new federal laws, we'll get Ledge Council in here for that. Those are the two items that I'm have planned. So if you have more questions or comments, you can even let me know over the weekend. Because we have no weekends. But anyway, okay, so I think we're good, yeah, okay, we are adjourned.
Maybe sure.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.